looking elsewhere for work as well. So just navigating, trying to do job applications in COVID is very difficult. And I'm staying within academic advising as my career path.
And I'll introduce myself. I'm Tom Harris, former programmer. Now I'm the CEO of a company called HMB. We're an IT consulting company here in Columbus. I live close. I live in Westerville. Our office is in Westerville. So always got an eye out for Otterbein. I am a graduate of Ohio State University up the road as well. So happy to be here and want to welcome everybody and looking forward to the discussion.
And hey, you guys, can you hear me? Okay, hey, I am Jonathan Hill. I'm an Otterbein grad from 2015. I now live in Fort Worth, Texas, and I work for Lockheed Martin Corporation, which is a defense contractor for aerospace and space systems. And I work in the public relations and communications side of the house. I've been with the company about 6 years.
Hello, beautiful people. Great to be with you this wonderful afternoon. Christopher Thompson. I have the honor of every day waking up and serving as head of diversity and inclusion for U.S. Wealth Management, now JPMorgan Wealth Management, largest firm in the United States. But the stuff that we have to touch every single day, I'm really excited to help you understand how that small private liberal arts experience applies to a place like ours. Because as you can see in the background, Wittenberg University, small private liberal arts college product. So glad to be with you. Looking forward to the discussion today.
I'm Pam Biesecker. I'm the senior tax officer, chief tax officer at Nationwide Insurance in Columbus. Been there for 14 years. It's the longest I've been at one place. Not that I jumped around, I just got a lot of mileage on me, but it is the longest I've been at. I'm actually a graduate at Towson State University in Maryland and went to University Business Law School for my master's in tax. So I've gotten to see a diversity of different companies and cultures. So I hope that's beneficial to today's conversation. Thank you.
I think we got everyone. That's true. All right. Just want to make sure I didn't leave anyone out. All right, so we'll get right into it. So what I'm going to do is just throw out some questions for our panelists, and don't feel obligated like you have to answer every single one. But your thoughts are going to be very valued as we go through this. So my first question is, and we can do a popcorn style, whoever would like to go can go, is how does your company or your employer support Black lives in and out of the workplace?
Mine doesn't. In all honesty, we have statements, especially after the protests began over the summer. Every company was, sending out that email saying that they stood with Black lives, but after that email, usually nothing else came afterwards. There was an officer or a deputy, a diversity and inclusion deputy that was hired. However, again, nothing much just came out of that as well. It was definitely tough and kind of ironic. I work for a company where we educate international students, and yet a lot of our supervisors and leadership do not seem to be educated on the history of their country and the history of the people they employ. So it definitely took a toll on the on us all as a whole, and definitely we decided to stand up and, you know, call them out on it, and hopefully they go in a good direction in these months to come.
Thank you.
You know, I'll take that one because one of the things that I am most proud of, and frankly why I wake up every single day, is because there is, and frankly the reason why 3 years ago I decided to come to this particular place, because our CEO, Jamie Dimon, now watch this, I'm looking for a new opportunity. I'm reading Forbes, and the CEO of the largest bank in the United States says, like, to media, like out loud, so somebody could write it down so we could be held accountable for it, said, we don't have enough Black leaders in our firm. Hard stop. Who does that in the financial services industry in a place where the shareholder is top of mind? So as I investigated the place, I learned that there was real not intentionality around how we were driving diversity and inclusion as a real strategy from the top of the house on down. Now, let's be clear, we're 250,000 people globally, and how you define diversity in India is different than how you define diversity in San Antonio, Texas. Mm-hmm. And so the complexity around the discussion really is a part of the narrative around what we're trying to drive and how we're trying to maneuver through what is truly one of the most challenging times ever, because the truth around helping a Black life, to the question, is very specific. And it sounds and oftentimes feels very exclusionary. And the only successful way that you can do it with not intentionality, but to drive impacts is, number one, it's got to be a business priority, top down, and embed into the BAU. Everything that your organization does, it can't be a program that you launch here and there. It can't be a conversation where somebody feels good and you don't do anything with it. It has to align to business outcomes, potentially compensation, things that get folks' attention. And then when you get their attention, we have a process called listen, learn, lead. We first create the pathway where you can listen to the issues, the challenges, the things that are happening to a Black life. Then you educate yourself. You learn why that Black life is having that particular experience. And then it gives you permission or a pathway then to lead in a way that allows now for sustainability in your environment. To be clear, we didn't get here yesterday and we won't fix it tomorrow. This is a long journey that we're on. And to the extent that when we have a person like me, I talk about it in the form of my rapping. My rapping gives me permission to go in a lot of different rooms, but if my rapping doesn't come with substance and the ability to understand data and the narrative that allows us to go into a room, speak intelligently about the why, right? Where inclusion then informs how you drive diversity and representation, then you start to see some real movement. So for us, it has become, at least in the time that I've been here, minimally a 4-year journey we have been on that is specifically designed to touch Black lives, Hispanic or Latinx new language lives, our Asian lives, our female lives, right? How do we make sure that the audiences that we want greater representation on, do we have a business strategy for them? And do we have pathways and mechanisms and resources that allow us to make sure we're having the conversation? And then lastly, from an external perspective, I don't know if you all read the last press release, but we aligned with Jamie, the Business Roundtable. We're investing over the next 5 years, $30 billion into Black and Latinx communities, not just to do it, but to truly begin to close the gaps that we have around credit, around what we have around home lending, around what we have just in the discussion around wealth. So that's some of the stuff that we're doing. And frankly, you probably hear some of the passion from me around it because it's the real meat and there's some real money around how we're driving it.
And I want to add on to what Christopher said, so I don't want to repeat. We're doing all the statement stuff. We have actually a Catalyst for Change program. Nationwide has had a history of really supporting over 15 ARGs and certain business units within different groups all along. But when this all happened, I think we put everything just on hydraulics. We just supercharged it. And one of the groups that we have is a Catalyst for Change. And along with that came Social Justice Task Force. And as Christopher was saying, we have about 4 different work streams on how we want to impact education, housing, economic, employment, economic mobility, and criminal justice outside of Nationwide. And then internally within Nationwide, how do you make that real? And we have had listening sessions. There's a lot of parallels. We've had listening sessions also, Christopher. And I actually head up the D&I Council for the OCFO organization, but we have an enterprise D&I council, and we have connected with the Social Justice Task Force. I think what I'm most proud of is we just had a constructive conversation on racism, and we had like twice the amount of attendees than we've ever had this, and we had it virtually. And I just thought that was so powerful, because the first step is, how do you even have the conversation? It's very difficult for some.
Yeah, this is Jonathan. To both of those points, I think that's excellent. I think just like we're doing today, it's about being accountable for the actual discussion. It is about Black Lives Matter. It is not about All Lives Matter. And understanding that from a corporation's narrative is sometimes a challenge. I support a lot of executives in their communications. And what does that look like when we're talking about, being inclusive and diverse, but especially during 2020, how important it was to really be accountable and talk about what's actually going on and listen and be heard and give that opportunity. I think it depends on the individual sometimes. I think it really depends on your leader. And I know at Lockheed Martin, it's just constantly having the conversation like we mentioned. So we've been doing, monthly check-ins. We talk about it individually. We've been doing listening sessions. We have a huge amount of employee resource groups and business resource groups that, across all different spans of life. But this year especially, it's been, let's talk about racism, and let's not just talk about being authentic and what that means and respect and all those things. Like, let's really talk about what's going on. And there have been some hard conversations, but I think it's just super important to be right out front and really actually talk about it.
Yeah, I'll just add, our company, we have 250 employees, so we're a pretty small company compared to a lot of others. So for us to have, massive amounts of groups and capital and this and that, we kind of started small. And for us, it was a lot about just education and just kind of trying to, wear others' hats and understand, like, well, some people grow up with, headwinds. Some people grow up with tailwinds. And what does that really mean? And those perspectives, when this was all breaking out, sometimes it was just having dialogue with some of our, Black colleagues, and they're like, I'm afraid to let my kids, go out and go to their friend's house, for fear something's going to happen to them. And it's almost incomprehensible when I heard things like that. I was just like, well, wow, I don't worry about that stuff. So I think education was really, open-mindedness to just listening. And that's the theme of what everybody's talking about, but it's key critical to start there. And the lip service a lot of companies gave and probably meaning well, but following through, it's harder to do that. But I think it's more important to do that. So that's what I'll add. I think it's a great conversation.
Thank you for those responses. But those are very powerful, just looking at what your organizations are doing and the importance of actions following the words. And think of how many mission statements include the words diversity, equity, or inclusion in them, but how many of them actually practice those words. And so sometimes you end up where people agree to work for a company and it's like, this is not what I signed up for. I signed up for what you pitched to me on your website, for what you said to me in the interview, and that's not what I'm experiencing here. So yeah, definitely well said. And a lot of companies are wrestling through this now. What does that mean for them in their spaces? And it also encourages the person that is going out trying to navigate their career path to say, where can I go that I know I'm going to be valued? And so, for all of us, I think we've thought of some type of version of that question. So I asked the panelists, what have you experienced and observed related to navigating your career path as your authentic self? Any successes and challenges?
can get started on that one. So I think the biggest takeaway from a success is it's what you make of it in so many ways. And a lot of what these corporations or even small companies offer from a diversity standpoint can really set you apart. And there's so much leadership opportunity and networking opportunity within these different communities that, whether it's an employee resource group, business resource group, a lot of those companies have these different pockets of individuals where you can really advocate and talk about the issues. I'm gay. I came out when I was 15, and to work at Lockheed Martin as a defense contractor, highly government regulated, and to be so supportive of my lifestyle and really want to talk about it and understand the issues I face, the issues that transgender people face, and even down to how medically that impacts people from a healthcare standpoint. But that biggest observation of all of it is it's what you make of it in so many ways. It can be, a social type of situation where you're a part of an organization, very much like you would be at Otterbein, where you have a group of friends that are like-minded, or it can also be a career opportunity to step in and be a leader and talk about things and go to leadership and present. And that's a huge benefit that I've really harnessed with Lockheed Martin, and kind of using it as your differentiator, but also using it as your value add in a lot of ways in your overall personal brand. It doesn't really separate you, it just adds to your overall growth as a human. That's what I'd say.
Jonathan, I love that for a lot of different reasons. And you used a word that I spent about 20 years in recruiting, and we always used to talk about what's the differentiator? Like, what's the thing that you bring to the conversation that nobody else does, if you will? And the one thing that, whether it's a coaching session or I'm specifically mentoring someone, diverse or not, the one thing that we talk about is making sure you know your voice, right? What's your narrative, right? You said the term brand, like, who are you? And if you can't articulate who you are and what you bring to the conversation, how can you ever expect that somebody else will? Like, I do this little simple thing. If I said the best part of waking up, most of y'all would know, is Folgers in your cup, right? It's because they presented themselves to be a thing, and they stay consistent in presenting that thing. So now it's just a household name. And some of what I think, as you are sitting in the seat that you sit in at the university that you are, there's a brand that you are creating right now. There's a narrative that's being shaped around you. There is your name being spoken in rooms that you're not in. Do you know what they're saying? And if you don't, you got some homework to do. And some of how you craft that is making sure that you stay consistent in how you present yourself, right? That you don't vacillate back and forth in trying to establish what your identity is, especially when you're talking to a client who wants to hire you. Present the very best you of who you are, and they'll accept you for you. If they don't, their loss, not yours. I also talk to my folks about, I am Christopher Thompson, LLC. If I am my own business, then whatever I present and how I present myself, it's in a way that nobody else can value me differently than how I value myself. So begin to build that real confidence that even if you don't have the specific experience necessary, there is nobody like you. No, there's nobody specifically made like you. And so be the very best you can, present that, and you'll find that you'll win more times than not.
That great stuff there, and it's right along, up the alley that I believe in is really. I'm going to make 2 points. One, it's about trusting your gut. We all have instincts, little voices we hear inside of us. That's your true self speaking out. I mean, that is your authentic self that's coming out. Trust it. You don't want to try and be somebody you're not. Sometimes we get influenced and we get convinced to go left when we thought we were supposed to go right. Trust that. Don't give up on that. Sometimes you're going to be wrong, but I think too often we don't put our hand up and again, kind of what Christopher's saying, you gotta be real. And that's kind of my second thing. I would say in the workplace, made me think of that. Too often people try and be something they're not because they want to get a promotion. They want to get that job. They want to get that position. They get it. It's like, congratulations, you got it. And then they absolutely hate it, because now they're expected to do these things they don't really like to do, or to be somebody else. It just doesn't work. And most times it ends poorly. So, like going on job interviews, you don't want to sell yourself if it's not who you really are. You got to sell who you really are, and you want to find out who they are, because it's a match that you're going to be a long-term match. Don't just, again, to be somebody you're not. Be who you are. You'll find that match. You'll be a lot happier in what you're doing. You'll be motivated when you get up in the morning. So anyway, that's what made me think of that.
Right. And Tom, I remember turning down a job offer because I felt that, and they wanted me bad. And I just said, my husband asked me, goes, why aren't you interested? And I said, I don't think the fit is there. I think that I could sell myself to get the job, but would I be happy in that environment? And I think that's really, really important, because if you're going to have to hold back, you are going to regret it later on. So you really, in working various places from the East Coast to the Midwest, I've had the advantage of seeing different cultures and the way people deal with each other. And so I've learned from that as, outreaches of employment and things of that nature. Who do you want to work with, and who do you want to be in the culture? And that's why I've been with Nationwide like 14 years.
Yeah, I think a lot of this comes back to how we choose authenticity over being pleasant, right? There's this difference. And it's not about creating something that you aren't, as you mentioned. It's about, what does authenticity mean to you as a person, and how does that, again, set you apart from other people, whether you're gay, straight, black, or white. I mean, it's about how you show up for a conversation. It's about that mutual respect. And I think that's where this year is kind of balanced, right? It's like, we still have to come out in front and say, all right, Black Lives Matter. There are issues that we need to talk about. This is no kidding. It's time to talk about them. But at the same time, it's about stepping up and respecting, your fellow coworker or anyone else in your life, as you'd want to be treated. Like, all of this just comes back to positive intent every single time. And it's always that golden rule, even, in a corporation, it always comes back to that. And that golden rule impacts business results like you wouldn't believe. And how a team works, and the overall effectiveness of how a project is implemented, it all has to do with that positive intent. So authenticity over pleasantness is something to really think through.
Very well said. Wise words shared there from our panelists. Going to the next question, and this is building off of question one. So the first question was talking about Black lives in particular, and how companies can support that, how you are upholding those standards within your respective areas of influence. But what does it look like as far as creating inclusive environments? What are some things an employer can do environment within their group as a marginalized identity and also an ally? Because I think it's important that as you're giving this advice, that students know what to look for. What are some of the things that they can look for to say, this might be an inclusive community that they're building here, and what does that day-to-day look like?
I'll take it. So a couple of things. So one of the first things that you'll find within our firm is, last year we launched an initiative called the Journey to Inclusive Teams. And it's a firm-wide initiative that's in partnership with the Neuro Leadership Institute, Brain People, helping us think differently about the things that might be uncomfortable, right? If you heard this narrative, comfortable being uncomfortable, right? You started with that kind of narrative of getting people to feel like, hey, there's something uncomfortable, I need to learn to talk about it. That's not easy. And in a corporate environment, like, that's not why you showed up. Like, your paycheck isn't going to change because of that. Well, some of the data would suggest in 20 years it will. So some of what you're driving towards in creating an inclusive environment, I'll go back to what I said earlier, is that it can't just be about social issues, because there is, as you all well know, in the current environment, we can't seem to agree. And where there is no agreement, it makes it very difficult to drive outcomes, whether it is around social justice, or if it's around how you write tax code, or if it, you name it, if you can't find a place where there can be compromise and agreement, it makes it very, very difficult for you to actually execute on outcomes. And so a part of what we have been doing in that partnership with the Neuro Leadership Institute is helping to define a couple of really very specific things. Number one, common language and common practice around what diversity and inclusion actually is. What are the definitions that everybody can leverage and utilize, so that you don't have swirl in the environment where one person thinks it's one thing and somebody thinks it's something else? It's the greatest way to get no traction, is to keep running on a train where people are defining things differently. So first, you define it well. Number two, you set up the stage where you begin to define what the Neuro Leadership Institute called as exclusion. If you don't know what's not there, how can you solve for it? So some of how we think about representation is recognizing what we don't have and why we don't have it. And then what's the plan to make sure that we are, through our privilege, through our influence, creating pathways to include those who haven't been included. And then we think very critically about this idea of unconscious bias, not in the illicit bias Harvard principled way, where we're identifying characteristics outwardly, but we're looking very specifically around business practices or policies and procedures or systematic things that are, or systemic things, whichever words you want to use, depending on which area you work in. But what are the things keeping you from being able to make sure that everybody has the opportunity for their voice to be heard and to be introduced into a narrative that allows them to feel like they are valued and important in the environment? And as we think about some of the unconscious bias that may be happening in our environment, is it because we are both Ohio State fans? And if I'm in a room with a Michigan fan, how might that person feel? Well, to me, that's okay. And I digress. So to the extent that you're beginning to recognize what those things are in your environment and then beginning to solve for them through very prescriptive and simple action plans that allow people to be sure that if this happens, then I'm going to do this. It's one of the prescriptive things that the Neuro Leadership Institute has designed with us. And that is an if-then statement. If I encounter this scenario, then I'm going to do this differently. A one sentence, very simple prescriptive way to set an action plan going forward, so you can identify what it is and then be able to find common ground with each other so you can really add value, so there's clarity around how you move forward together. So that's some of what we're doing in our environment. And what we're finding is that as we're doing that, more voices are coming to the conversation. We have more inclusive interviewing slates and processes and teams, so that when you interview, you're meeting more people than you would in our past state. We are not perfect, but we are truly on the journey to it.
I want to apologize if I have a lag in my audio. But I would also say for your employer to be inclusive is diversifying their leadership. It's really important that you see in your leadership, your human resources, that they also reflect the people that work with them and reflect their clients and reflect in general just the population of our country and our world. And I would also say it's really important too that within your company, while you're interviewing, do this research, but also to see if they have support groups, they have resources that help everyone out, especially during times like this, like the mental strain that happens during these times on the employees. It's really good to have those support groups, to have those resources, and I think those are really great to look for, and if a company doesn't have it, to include.
Well, I think that's a great point, and I'll kind of add to that as well. I think leadership, you lead with your actions. I love what Jamie Dimon said, and just put it out there and said, that's it, period. We got to do this. But then you have to go do it. That's even more important. And I think that leadership starts at the top. and it's got to flow through all. If people see, hey, they said they were going to do this, they did this. Now I can see people that look like me, and I see this is, a fair work environment. That I think that inspires, but it lays the groundwork for the culture of what it is. It's not what you say it is what it is. And I think that's really, really important. And the other thing I guess I'd comment on is, and I've got a CFO who's, it's a 1 or it's a 0. There's nothing in between. And I tell him, I'm like this, and I'm not calling him out if you know who I'm talking about, but diversity equals higher profits. I mean, that's statistically true. And what we're in business, and yeah, we've got, in some places you have shareholders, you've got owners. Business is about making money. And if you tell me, hey, if I have a more diverse workforce, if I have a more diverse leadership team, that adds to growth and the bottom line. Well, that's a driver. That's a winner. And I think that's what some people are missing, is that to embrace that is it is a marriage. And so, that's how we're talking about it. It's like, hey, if we could do this, then we're going to be a better company. Well, why wouldn't we do that? Right? It's a great motivator. So my 2 cents.
Yeah, I think to add, so I'm not a leader, I'm an individual contributor. And I think it's important at, my level to really remember to give grace in these conversations, but still push, right? You want clarity, you want action, but this stuff does take time, and you have to give grace to those leaders who are working through it and having the dialogue. So ask for follow-up, be a part of the conversation by all means, but also give grace, like you'd want to give yourself grace, because this stuff is really hard and it's not black and white. So a lot of it is having the conversation again, and the accountability of our leadership at any organization to talk about it. But I've had to give a lot of grace in this year, for similar conversations like this in the workplace, and that grace will get you far.
And I will just say, agree with what everybody is saying here, but I think, again, it's actually, the rubber meets the road. So when we have these diversity dialogues, if associates are attending and leaders are not, and they're not hearing, which is one of the things I try to drive in the OCFO organization, I'll go out and corral people, because that has to come back to our roundtable, or it's meaningless if you don't hear it and you don't do anything about it. And I guess the best gift I get back, and I just got off a conversation with someone before this meeting, is when somebody calls you with insight where they're concerned, and they look at you as a vessel, and that is your job as a leader to be that vessel and take that communication upward to make the company a better company.
That's outstanding. So we have 2 factors going on here. So we have the company side of, hey, this is what we're going to try to do to make this day-to-day process for everyone. So the employer feels empowered to be able to empower other people, right? And being able to have people in their spaces that are saying, I can do my job in this space and not have to think about all these other things, that I can be this in this space and that's accepted here. I could be this in this space and that's accepted here. Now, from the employee side of this entering the environment and thinking of some of our students, they may have internships going on right now, and sooner or later, they're going to have their first job out of college, and they're looking for a space that's going to accommodate their holistic identities. What advice do you have for students that are looking for that space, and how can they successfully navigate that? Because they're not going to know everything right up hand. So maybe even to be more specific, what are some things that students could do before they commit to the job and while they are on the job, as far as navigating their authentic selves in the workplace?
What I would do before you even start the job is then what are the avenues where you can participate in the company? What I really encourage you is to be a voice versus sitting on the bleachers. If you're sitting on the bleachers and you get your Gallup survey, and all you do is put ones down, or you're frustrated, participate. You're hearing from every one of these companies, there's avenues, there's associate resource groups, there's D&I councils. Get out there, participate, and help. And assume the innocence that people do not understand certain frustrations. And that's all I can say, is there's so many avenues to participate, and it's great for your career. You don't realize by participating the leaders that you meet that can help catapult your career for you.
I think that yeah, that is fantastic. Like you have to manage the narrative in your head. Like if you're telling yourself a story around what the place is and you haven't done the most important thing, and that is your research and your preparation to know who that leader is, what that organization is about. Like the cool part, like I'm not going to give my age, but one of my first jobs I got because I read it in the newspaper. Like I read an ad in the newspaper. You have so many resources today to begin to understand how the place is talking about this thing called diversity and inclusion, talking about beyond diversity and inclusion, its people more holistically. And then you have this thing called LinkedIn, and I know you all are on it. Like one of the very first things that I do is I look up any and everybody who works for that place. And I'm like, do I know them? Who am I connected with that knows them? What's real? What's not? Like, because some of the narrative that's out in the community is just to make sure the place looks good, sounds good. I want to talk to somebody who's sitting in the seat, in particular, somebody who's sitting in the seat who's had a poor experience and they're still there. And I want to know the why. And then I've got to be really smart about the narrative I create in my head around what the expectations should be. Good, bad, ugly, and or indifferent. No place is perfect. And so you have to decide that after all the research, after all the preparation, after the conversations, you've got to own your decision. When you show up and kill it. When you show up, when things go wrong or things don't go the way you would have expected it, then reach out to a mentor, have a conversation. Don't be quiet about it, right? Make sure that your experience is not your own experience where you get yourself in a silo or a shell and you're just quiet. No, find allies, find mentors, find sponsors, find coaches. Places like ours in particular, and with like Pam, where we have some volume of individuals who have been at the place, there's somebody there that's going to be there to help you. Don't expect that you're going to go through this journey by yourself, because when you do it by yourself, you struggle through it by yourself. So phone a friend, old school language. Maybe this group is too young to understand what phone a friend is, but phone a friend, have a neighbor, join a colleague, right? Have a coffee and conversation. I think that's one of the very best things you do, but it starts by making sure you manage how you think about the experiences that you're having and telling yourself the right, different, or a better story about what it is.
Yeah. Go ahead. No, go ahead, Carolina. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. No, I agree with Christopher. I stalk people on LinkedIn. I will find every individual that works there and get to know and see where they worked, but also try to speak with them, join Facebook groups. I also say that just don't compromise yourself. I think a lot of times we do that, whether it's in relationships, friendships, and then even just in the workforce. We compromise what makes us happy. We compromise with what makes us mentally healthy. And we do so because, we do it for the sake of the job, for the sake of the paycheck. We do it for the sake of, maintaining a relationship. Don't compromise yourself.
Yeah, I was going to add internships. You get an opportunity for an internship. Instead of just showing up and working your 30 or 40 hours a week, take that opportunity to build a relationship, to build relationships. Go to lunch, go to breakfast with people that have been there 2 or 3 or 5 years, and you'll be amazed at what you can learn in a 45-minute breakfast. Just you'll get the inside scoop, because that's so important to just understanding what a company, what they're made of, what they're really about. No job, no company's perfect, but when you get that chance to talk to people, the LinkedIn thing, it's funny. I speak to my age, but I have kids that are through college and now in the workforce, and I have many of their friends that I coached in middle school and high school that reach out to me and go, hey, what do you know about Nationwide? What do you know about Cardinal Health? What do you know about such and such? I see you've worked over here. And that's a great way to just find out insights. So but it does take legwork, and it's a little harder than just going out to, job boards and, some of the things, the resources that are out there. But the good old fashioned talking to people is number one.
Yeah, I think my biggest advice for students is don't wait. Do it now at Otterbein. I mean, you have so many abilities to connect with groups, to ask these questions to your university, to your professors, to really understand inclusivity and diversity. And I mean, the university just does a killer job at this. So I'd say lean into it now as a student, as you're defining your career path and what your passions are. At the same time, figure out who you are as a person and do that at Otterbein, because it's a safe space to do so. And you're going to be accepted no matter what. And it's going to really give you that kind of foundation of knowledge to be even more mature when you go into the workplace, whether you're an intern or it's your first entry level position. So I'd say start at Otterbein.
Yeah, that's excellent. Especially doing your homework is one of the biggest takeaways from what you all said, and don't be afraid to do that in the interview. I think that sometimes we feel like, okay, I have to be the most likable person, and if I ask this question, is that going to go against me? Well, at the end of the day, as the panelist said, you're going to have to want to put yourself in a position, an environment that's going to help you thrive and not just survive. And so it's important for you to be asking those questions. So you take your research from the website, you talk to a couple of folks, and now I'm going to ask you, I saw that you were working on a diversity inclusion plan. What are some of the components of that plan? Or you have these business resource groups going on. What are some of the things that those groups have done? And sometimes people have the infrastructure, but not the delivery. And if they can't really tell you anything, and if you see that they're stagnant in a lot of places, then you have something else to think about there. Like, if you enter that space, maybe it's not going to be the most progressive space, but you could be a part of the change. Or you could say, hey, they've had a lot of years of doing some really great work, and I can add to that.
Hey, James.
Also, sorry, Chris, just real quick. I think it goes both ways on that too, right? It's also, as a candidate, they're going to ask you those questions now. Like, these organizations are doing behavioral interviewing, asking you, tell me about a time that you experienced something that wasn't diverse or people weren't inclusive to you. And that's, again, why I say start now at Otterbein or start where your current internship is, because you need those kind of situational experiences to bring to the table when you're getting interviewed. I know Lockheed Martin asks those questions now to potential talent. So it's not just about the organization, it's also a value add as someone being interviewed to have that background.
That's where I was going, candidly. There is a body of work that we're doing right now, because we're finding that in our recruiting process, one of the questions, and I want to challenge you to have this on your list, is a question around diversity and inclusion when you go to the interview. And organizations who don't have, and you're not looking for them to have this like deep philosophical answer. You just want to know that they've got an answer. Like, that's kind of that's one of those first steps. Like, if there's an answer there, you keep going, right? But if there's a place that's like, well, we haven't started talking about that yet, then that gives you some indication around how you might want to think about it. I would also say, so have the question, how inclusive is your organization? How do you define inclusion, right? The things that give you permission to have them tell you who they are, rather than you just having to spill all of who you are. This is a two-way street. When you're interviewing, you are interviewing them as much as they are interviewing you. Never lose that as a part of the top of your mind. Remember, you are your own LLC. And if they don't show value in that moment, they're not going to show value later.
Very well said. Our last question is, you can spend the last 5 minutes here tackling this one, is what's next for your respective organizations? So there's been a lot of statements released. There's been some initiatives that are currently going on, but the work is progressive. It's evolving. And so, what's next for your workspaces to help make your organization more inclusive?
I'll go. So I love the work we're doing, right? So the first thing I want to say is I played football, and when I played football, my freshman year, we ran drills every day. Same drills my sophomore year, same drills my junior year, same drills what am I saying? If you want it to work, don't get too creative and try to opine on new ideas. Do the basics well, the blocking and tackling. Some of the basic blocking and tackling is knowing how to listen, knowing how to listen, right? And so for us, it's this exercise where we're starting to really understand what's the true problem I'm solving for. And when you have the real problem you're solving for, then you can set strategies and actions and programs and plans and BRG activities and initiatives that align to the problem you're solving, so you get to the root. And for us, it becomes this exercise where we're rinsing and repeating some of the same things that our leaders went through, and now our leaders are empowered to do what those of us who are in the space have taught them how to do. So it goes down deep into the organization. The vision for my team is to embed D&I into everyday people practices to drive business outcomes. At the end of the day, if you don't embed it, then it's not going to actually get you the return that you want. So it's just another program, and people feel good in the moment, but you don't actually change how people are being treated. The last piece I'll say for us is that it's about focusing on not just representation, but behaviors. If we can change behaviors, especially at the middle management level, at the point that somebody's having a problem, how do you respond? That's when you begin to have the kind of impact that you need. And that's how we're driving inclusion in our space.
I'll jump in. We're, again, kind of a smaller company than a lot of the others here. But for us, we're just trying to start small. We're trying to do a couple things really well. Let's start there and build. This is, somebody said it earlier, this isn't something that just became a problem yesterday and it's going to get solved tomorrow. This is the journey. I mean, this thing is, it's going to take time and a lot of effort. But you just got to start with one thing. It's like eating the elephant. You just get one bite at a time. So we're trying to do that through education. We got a monthly lunch and learn session we're doing. It's all centered around inclusion and just diversity topics. And then secondly, we looked at like simple things like, where do we recruit talent? Well, we go to these 4 schools every year, and we've done a great job. It's like, well, wait a minute, what about this school? We've never even been to a predominantly Black college. And it's not because we were ignoring it. It's just no one thought about doing it. So there's just some things that are kind of eye-opening that low-hanging fruit. Let's go do that. Why wouldn't we do that? And probably thirdly for us is, let's put a few markers. Let's put a few things, markers in the sand for 2021. We're gonna have an executive that's from one of these underserved groups. That's one thing. Let's just do that. If we can do that, that's a start. So that's how we're kind of looking at it. Instead of trying to solve it all, let's pick some things we can do and we can measure that can start the process in the right direction.
Yeah, I think another element to that, kind of building off of it, is, again, from a non-leader perspective, how are we communicating hiring practices and what that looks like? How are we educating our workforce on the realities that a hiring manager may face when looking at potential talent or actually looking at resumes? So that's a really important component of the reality of what we're trying to achieve with being diverse, that I think has to be looked at by leadership in any type of organization. Is no kidding, like how are we getting talent in? Like you mentioned, from schools, what are our target schools we're looking at? Where are we giving our donations? But again, it's what are we trying to achieve by this? And there's a lot of policies behind hiring practices that, you know, someone that may not be elite, may not have brought in talent before, needs to understand. And that's a huge part of the communication component to this, I think.
I would also add, don't just look at how you hire, also have some metrics around who you retain. So that's always indicative. You can be very successful selling, but are you retaining that talent?
Yeah, everyone said it's that two-way street there. Yeah, I can give you the best pitch ever, and then you come in here and have a miserable experience because you didn't get what you signed up for, and then we can't grow if people keep leaving. And I think some of us in our work experience have been a part maybe of some of those type of organizations who are like, oh, this is not it. This is not for me. But yeah, I think one of the big takeaways here as we close is that, you know, silence is not an option here. You know, so you're going to, when you're in positions to make decisions, you use your platforms to do that. When you are looking at what is best for you, then you need to advocate for yourself and make the decision that's best for you at the end of the day. And so when we put all those things together, you know, you can have a successful journey throughout your careers, just looking at, you know, who has my best interests at heart. Now, of course, I have to perform, but who has my best interests at heart is going to support me as an entire human being. And then what are the strengths that I could bring to the table to help even elevate this company even further? So those things should be a part of your mindset as you matriculate through your journeys. I just want to give a thank you to our panelists for being so gracious with their time and dropping a lot of knowledge on us and give us a lot of things to chew on as we move forward with our days. And so I'm going to turn it over to Ryan Brechbill to close us out.
Thank you, James. Certainly echo your appreciation for our panelists. Thank you for your time and insight today. We really, really appreciate it. Students, thank you for being here. We realize how busy you all are right now, and that it's an extremely hectic time of the semester, and certainly with all things considered, everything else going on. So we very much appreciate you all being here. And hopefully you've taken away some really strong nuggets, because our panelists, I think, have done a fantastic job here. So thank you all for being here. We have recorded this session, and we'll have that available. If you are in need of that, please let us know. You can email career@otterbein.edu. We can get that information to you. We will also be sending out if you didn't RSVP through Handshake for this, we'll send out the panelist bios just so that you can learn a little bit more about their backgrounds. But again, just appreciate everyone for being here. Taylor, thank you for co-hosting with me and helping navigate all of this technology. So we really appreciate it. James, always appreciate your partnership. So again, thank you all for being here, and have a wonderful rest of your week and Thanksgiving holiday. Thank you all.